Alex here with the Wisconsin Computer Club. Welcome back to the shop, and today I want to talk a little bit more about Atari. I know I've talked about Atari a lot, but with EverCon coming, there's a lot of Atari that's going to be on display, and a lot of history for Atari is going to be out there, and I'd really love to just talk more about this fascinating company that made some incredible products. So, right here we have the famous Atari 2600. This is a 4-switch model, the pretty common humdrum whatever. This, of course, is the best-selling home video game system of all time. It continues to be sold today in a transmogrified form. From 1977 to today, that's a huge span of time. And this was Atari's bread and butter, basically all the way from its initial launch until Atari, as an independent entity, kind of failed and faded into the background until it was kind of reconstituted in recent days. But this is a system that Atari tried and tried and tried to replicate and to succeed and to create successor products for, and ultimately they all came up short. Not to say they didn't make good systems. They made a number of very good systems, but they never captured the same magic that the 2600 had. They never captured the same amount of market share. They certainly didn't get the sales off of them that they wanted. And so the 2600 remained very dominant even into the late times of its lifespan, and had a lot more support that way than any of their other systems ever did, which is interesting how Atari tried to adapt and evolve. So, I'm going to get this one out of the way here. The initial successor product to the 2600 was, of course, the 5200. The Atari 5200 was an enormous console. It had a big switchover in how it handled everything, processed everything, and it made a number of mishaps. Problems and things that came up with it are obvious to us with the power of hindsight, but at the time, Atari really thought they were marching into the future with this new system, this new product line, and people were going to embrace it, and they didn't. And to their credit, Atari learned very quickly. They tried to stem the damage with the 5200. They created an adapter for the later consoles so that you could play 2600 games on it to fix the backwards compatibility. They tried to kind of make new joysticks and improve the joysticks to try and reduce the number of breakdowns and problems with those. But again, it was too little too late. By the time the video game crash hit, it wiped out a number of their competitors, and it left Atari in a much weaker state. When Time Warner sold them off, while they became an independent company, their new leader, Jack Tramiel, had much more faith in their computer division than he did in their video games division, which meant that the finished successor to the 2600, the Atari 7800, languished in warehouses until their transfer was complete. And by the time this was released, it was very much too late for it, despite all the good things that it tried to do. This machine is very, very indicative of the time frame. They were trying to kind of rebrand and reimagine Atari, less as, oh, it's a funny video game thing, and as a serious piece of hardware. This was styled to fit in with your, at the time, black and silver hi-fi setups of the late 80s. So this was kind of the cool new thing. So we were starting to get into like black TVs and chrome elements and that kind of thing. So they were really angling towards a kind of a high-end prosumer. They wanted you not to see this as a toy, but something serious that you would use for entertainment. And it righted a lot of the wrongs of the 5200. It is backwards compatible with the 2600. It has the same cartridge input, and it has 9-pin controller ports, unlike the 5200, so you could use all of your old controllers, all of your old peripherals, all that sort of stuff. It all just worked right out the box. Additionally, they didn't make the same mistake as they did with the 5200. They created a new controller, and granted, it does look a little bit like a Star Trek's Next Generation phaser, but this one is much better built. It's got, it's got better switches in here. It doesn't break down as much. The buttons are much better. This is, you can drop this thing and it's not going to instantly break and get out of calibration and have all kinds of problems. So this was a huge step up, and then of course if people didn't like it, they could just plug in their existing joysticks and keep playing their games. So this little system was released on the scene, and it had pretty good processing power. It had a little bit of a shortfall when it came to its sound chip. The sound was the same sound chip they used in the original 2600, which meant that music was something it was not good at. It could not do complex sound. It couldn't do really music tracks unless they were very, very, very simple. And the biggest problem this thing had was in 1985, Nintendo released the Nintendo Entertainment System. And despite all this thing's best efforts, it could not compete with the NES. And really, the Achilles heel for Atari, especially from this machine pretty much on forward until the Jaguar era and kind of the end of Atari's home systems, was that their software lineup just could not compete with what Nintendo was offering at the time. The complex games people wanted, they wanted their Mario Brothers, they wanted their, their more advanced games with multiple levels and lots of stages and lots of story to them now. They wanted their licensed games like Ghostbusters and all those other new things that had a lot more going for them. And Atari was essentially re-releasing arcade titles. And while they're very good titles, it wasn't what the market wanted. And while this thing has some homebrew that has since demonstrated that it could have certainly competed in those markets, the developers weren't there for it. The developers wanted to develop for Nintendo, and then later they wanted to develop for Sega, and then they wanted to develop for other... So Atari was always in the back foot for developers, and with their catalog being mostly video games from the arcade scene that were getting more and more dated as the years go by, this really did kind of hurt them. But that's not to say it's not a great machine. For a retro collector or a retro enthusiast, the 7800 is a terrific console in that it can play both 2600 games, 7800 games, it can connect with all of your various peripherals, and it's just a rock-solid little machine. It shares a number of styling traits with the 5200 in terms of cable management and how some of those things go together, but it uses a traditional RF out. I can go grab it here. Let's see if I can get it plugged in. There we go. So we're just gonna, should have grabbed that earlier. There it is. All right, so we're just gonna flip that over and I should be able to power that on. There's nothing in there, so it's just gonna give you blue bars. So let's see what we got. Let's try Ms. Pac-Man. So cartridges came in these kind of silver labels to differentiate them from the 2600 carts. They're roughly the same size. I don't know how people felt about the black and white labels. I feel that they seem almost cheaper to me as they're not in color and they don't have the same kind of graphical flair as the 2600 carts did, which they really tried to push how colorful they were. Maybe this was a better design choice on their end, though. I really couldn't tell you. Sales figures for the 7800 are not great. It did not do very well commercially. But they did continue to sell them as they had piles of them well into the early 90s when ultimately it was canceled alongside all the other Atari 8-bit computers and the XE game system and all those other sort of things to try and make it go. So here we go. It's just Ms. Pac-Man. If you ever played Ms. Pac-Man, it is Ms. Pac-Man. The controller it takes a bit of getting used to, I'll admit. And I'm not all that great at Pac-Man. But you've got to kind of tap it, where the instinct is to kind of press and hold, but you really got to kind of tap this one. Oh, that was close. Oh, and then you got me. But I prefer the original 2600 sticks, so usually that's what I'll run with this thing. When we take this to shows, it's always kind of in a lineup with other Atari systems. Usually we like to do the 2600 and then the 5200 and the 7800 so people can kind of see the evolution, how it changed and didn't change. But as an Atari machine, it's fascinating. This was, I feel in many ways, kind of the last of the major Atari video game consoles. As the things that would come after this one were either derivatives of the computer range, like the XEGS, or were just kind of disastrous. The Lynx was very good. The Jaguar could have been good had it had a better game lineup. But again, both of them had some very significant flaws, some very serious problems that they never overcame. They were just not able to overcome those problems. And so in many ways, I feel like this is kind of the end of the road for Atari as in the home console market, at least. This was kind of, in conjunction with the XEGS, this was their last gasp to try and take back the market that they'd kind of built from the Nintendo Entertainment System and their kind of ever-growing power. And they never did. And Nintendo, of course, has been with us ever since, and Atari has kind of languished in the periphery until today, when, of course, they're now back selling new consoles again based all on the retro stuff. So interesting how things have kind of come full circle on that one. But anyway, this cool little machine, or one very much like it, will be at EverCon. So if you want to experience the Atari 7800 Pro system yourself, stop on by, come check it out. We've got some great games for it, so you can see it and experience it yourself and really enjoy it. So we hope to see you there. Thank you all so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of the stream and have a wonderful night.